These aren't just abstract political problems, they're deeply connected to the ways that we think about the information that we receive, how we engage with books and other media, and the communities that we build around them. Hello friends, my name is Marines, and today I want to talk to you about reading for escapism. This idea of reading for escapism comes up so frequently in bookish communities, especially as somebody who over the last many years has taken a critical approach to books and reviews and reading. I've seen reading for escapism used to describe why people read and how they approach certain books. I've been spinning my wheels a bit here since the TikTok ban went into effect and then quickly went out of effect, and we're all waiting to see what actually happens with TikTok and then the inauguration and everything that happened around there. Like, there are so many things on my mind as we brace ourselves for the next 4 years, and that applies to every aspect of my life, including thinking a lot about what the next 4 years will do for online communities and for the book community, and how our reading, our taste, and the art that is produced will respond to another Trump presidency. I am thinking a lot about or anticipating the ways that art and media and consumption will change or ultimately reflect this political moment. And as I sit here and think to myself over and over, how did we get here again? I'm also thinking a lot about how misinformation and disinformation have shaped our present reality. The ways that we engage with stories, whether that's books or TV shows or movies or news or even, dare I say, propaganda, really matter. And the idea of reading for escapism is not a neutral one. I think it's loaded with implications about how we think about books, how we talk about books, and how we excuse certain behaviors or messages in the name of entertainment. So before we dive into this, what do I mean by reading for escapism? There certainly is not one definition, and I think it will mean slightly different things to different readers. But let's say that in its simplest form, reading for escapism is this idea that we turn to books or stories in general as a way to step away from the stresses or challenges or realities of our lives. It is seeking comfort or entertainment or distraction from the world around us. And escapist reading is often, but not always, about immersion, and more specifically about immersing yourself in a story that feels safe or comforting or feels exciting, or where the stakes are manageable or the outcomes are predictable. I think that what I've noticed, and I know that this is anecdotal, I am approaching you with just like what I have been seeing in the book community, and I can't time bound this, so I can't say that this is new or recent, but I have noticed that I read for escapism often takes on this other layer. It's something that I see people use time and time again to sort of explain things like why they didn't notice something in a book, or to signal that they've chosen not to critically engage with what they're reading. You'll see it in comment sections, on social media, or even in reviews. I don't want to think too hard about this book. I just want to escape. It becomes a shield, consciously or unconsciously, against thought. And to be fair, I do want to acknowledge that this isn't just a quirk of the book community. It can be found, I'm sure, in other media communities, and it is a symptom of something that is much larger. We have all seen in 4K how easily false narratives can spread, how a lack of critical thinking can erode trust in institutions and in experts, and how illiteracy, both literal and media illiteracy, creates fertile ground for fascism to thrive. And then in response to said fascism, it is no wonder that people are craving ways to escape. The political reality that we are living in is one where misinformation is used as a tool of power, where the basic tenets of democracy are being undermined, and where bigotry is emboldened and pervasive. And the weight of that can feel unbearable. It is absolutely natural to seek refuge in stories, to want to step away from the chaos and uncertainty of the real world, even if only for a few hours. Even as I understand why escapism and the pull of escapism, I cannot stop thinking about what happens when we allow that escape to become a kind of refusal, and one that then becomes a shared language in the book community. These aren't just abstract political problems, they're deeply connected to the ways that we think about the information that we receive, how we engage with books and other media, and the communities that we build around them. One of the things that I'd love to hear from you guys down in the comments is about what you personally mean when you talk about reading for escapism and how you have seen that used in the book community. I'm very curious to see all of our different experiences or thoughts around what it means to escape into media. As we dive deeper into this topic, I'm going to start with the way that I most often see it used, which again is absolutely no surprise considering like the flavor of my content. When people come into my comment section to talk about reading for escapism, it is usually in response to some kind of criticism that I have made. Whether that's about harmful stereotypes, the author being problematic, or just like the broader implication of a story's messaging. It's a phrase that acts as a buffer, as a way of saying, this book isn't about all of that for me. I'm just here to enjoy it. And on the surface, that might seem fair. Not every book requires a sort of deep dive into the thematic nuance or an intense breakdown of the characters' motivations and their arcs. But it's when the sentiment becomes a pattern that I think it starts to act like a shield, not just against readers engaging critically, but for the stories themselves against being held sort of accountable. In that context, when we're having those kinds of conversations, reading for escapism feels less like a harmless sort of approach to media consumption and more like a way to disengage. It becomes this communal shorthand for opting out of difficult conversations. And in that way, it becomes a signal to other readers, right? That they can find each other. If you're opting out and I'm opting out, now we've kind of carved out this own other part of the community. And here in this place, we can excuse books for having damaging messaging or dismiss critique as sort of unnecessarily negative. And unfortunately, it just doesn't stay in that sort of carved out piece of the community. It does ripple outward. If we continuously tell ourselves and others that enjoyment and joy cannot coexist with critical thinking, we end up creating spaces where accountability, whether for authors or publishers or readers or like the story itself, feels optional. And I absolutely do not mean this in any sort of like carceral way. I don't mean this in the sense that we need to create spaces or communities that are about punishing people for what they read and what they enjoy. Accountability in this context to me is not about shame or about blame. And it's not about trying to create morality or purity test about what we enjoy. And honestly, I have seen an extreme version of that be the response to the extreme version of like reading for escapism. And I think to solve for both things, readers must and should learn how to enjoy and love things with flaws, how to talk about problematic media, and how to accept criticism of an art that you love as something separate than a criticism of you. Whether the idea of reading for escapism is the chicken or the egg in all of this, what we've ended up with are these bookish spaces where there's this pervasive fear that questioning a book or pointing out its shortcomings in any way is akin to ruining it. When we lean on reading for escapism in order to sidestep thought, we create environments where critical thought is seen as unwelcome or even antagonistic to enjoyment. This creates, first, a disservice to the communities that we are in, especially as we start to think about what we prioritize and what things we are saying are comfortable to escape into, even as they cause harm to the people that we very clearly, superficially say we are in community with. Choosing your own personal comfort, your own personal enjoyment over accountability absolutely erodes the foundation of any community, making it harder to have honest conversations and even harder still to foster any kind of real inclusivity. And it is second, a disservice to books themselves. For a bunch of people who claim to love books and reading, I have seen just an unusual amount of disparaging books, and it might be unintentional, but it is absolutely what happens when you hold up books and say that they are unworthy of your thought. That becomes even more apparent when you see how escapism is applied unevenly across genres. Genre fiction bears the brunt of this, and in a lot of ways, I think female-dominated spaces in genre fiction also get a larger portion of this. Things like romance and certain kinds of fantasy are often labeled as escapist, and I think by extension are then dismissed as sort of frivolous or less important, unintentionally by the people in reading communities. But I think we see this a lot reflected outside of the community, people looking into reading communities and the way that they view and perceive us. It really is a double insult. It undermines the value of these genres, but it also assumes that the people who read and love and enjoy them are incapable of doing so with critical thought. And of course, it perpetuates this idea that some kinds of stories, those that are seen as more serious or more literary, are inherently more valuable than others. Of course, you and I know that the irony here is that so-called escapist genres actually often have so much to say, and the very boundaries of their genre or the language of the genre can be really deeply invested in certain themes. Romance, for instance, often is really interested in ideas of agency and emotional resilience and emotional intelligence and growth and identity. Fantasy, of course, often wrestles with ideas of power, morality, justice, good, and evil. That is not to say that we can't also escape into them as good stories, but to dismiss them as escapist, I think undermines them as work. All of this is not to say that we all should stop reading for joy, or that every book has to be a moral or political statement. This isn't to say that every book requires a thesis level analysis, or that you need to dissect every piece of media that you consume. Joy and entertainment are vital. They will continue to be so over these next 4 years, but I'm going to repeat that we do ourselves a disservice when we assume that joy and critical thought are incompatible. You can read a book that makes you laugh, makes you swoon, takes you on an adventure, or makes you feel just deeply comforted while still acknowledging its broader implications and the messages that it conveys, especially if your reading of that book moves beyond your personal consumption and enters into community. Because here's the thing, is that I read for escapism is not being whispered quietly into the privacy of your own home. It's being said in comment sections and group discussions and reviews and videos, shared in public spaces where it becomes part of the communal narrative. That's when I read for escapism is no longer about how you approach your media, but it becomes part of the conversation that you are having about books, and part of the position that you are taking on what you will support, what you will promote, and what you will build community around. That's the heart of why this matters, is that reading does not exist in a vacuum, and especially not in shared online reading spaces. So I'm about to make a really bold statement here, and that's that over the next 4 years and beyond, I'm sure, but especially over the next 4 years, we actually owe it to ourselves and each other to combat the harm that uncritical thought has wrought. This idea that we can compartmentalize our reading lives and keep it away from our political and our social realities is a pretty comfortable lie, and one that I think is in fact contributing to what is making the world so bad that we feel we are owed an escape. Yes, I am making a straight line between, well, the curtains are just blue and it's not that deep and I just read for fun, and to larger issues of unchecked misinformation, the inability to read for meaning, the normalization of harmful narratives, and the erosion of critical thinking as a societal skill. And perhaps these are just symptoms of larger problems that we have here in the US of education and literacy, but then we should be aware of them as such. Reading for escapism is dead, or at least I think it should be. That is, any reading that you do just for you should be between you and you. Any reading that you want to do with others, you owe it to that person, you owe it to me to think about what you are reading. I want to emphasize that this isn't about shaming people for what they are reading. It isn't about setting up gatekeeping standards or about turning every book discussion into this high stakes debate. But it is about recognizing that no story exists in a vacuum, and neither do we. It is about acknowledging that we are reaping the bitter fruit of maybe decades of disengagement, of treating critical thought as optional, of separating the media that we consume from the lives that we live. And I feel like I personally will be damned if we meet that with further disengagement. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that all of this has real world stakes. How we read, the skills that we have to read, that shapes how we think, how we vote, how we treat each other, how we prioritize each other, and that shapes the communities that we build and the the values that we pass on. So again, to be clear, I'm not saying that you have to dissect every cozy mystery or lighthearted rom-com or like fantasy where they all kiss. What I am saying is that when you engage with books in community, when you share them, when you discuss them, when you recommend them, you owe it to that community to engage thoughtfully. If your brain was off when you read it, you need to turn it on before you talk to me about it. I will leave you off with a challenge first, and that is that the next time you go to pick up a book, to ask yourself not just what you are escaping from, but what you are escaping into. What is that story offering you? What is it asking of you? And what are you going to do with that? Because the answers to those questions matter, maybe now more than ever. That's it for me today. I would love to chat with you guys about this down in the comments, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about the next 4 years and how it might influence art and what we see coming out of books and our reading communities. I really appreciate you guys watching this one. It's been a little while since I've just done like a straight discussion video, but I have so many thoughts just tumbling around in my head. I've been very frozen from making content because of everything that's going on. So I just decided to yap at you guys about what I've been thinking and feeling. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.